Yeah, I earned it already.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now we are going into the material. Now we're not jumping right into the text because I think it's important to see some bigger picture views of history. And one of those is chronology, time, periodization. Periodization. The current academic view is that the 19th century holiness movement is connected with the previous 18th century Methodist movement and the 20th century Pentecostal movement. But I'm not 100% comfortable with that. Why? Because there is more diversity. As things develop, they can become more diverse, and sometimes outsiders can join in who weren't even part of the 18th century movement. So people, what you call new kids on the block, or late comers. Why? Because historians, theologians, why is this this is actually the WHSSP majority view, that it's 18th century Methodist, 19th century holiness, 20th century Pentecostals, and it's just straight, just like a highway that goes through 3 states, like I-29, where I live, goes through Missouri, goes from Kansas City up to Nebraska, up to Iowa, and then South Dakota. So if you do that, yeah, it's connected. You get on it and you go, but hey, things change along the way, not just weather-wise. Continuity is valuable above all else, proving that we are all Wesleyans. But reading the history shows a level of discontinuity as well as continuity, and a level of diversity that is ignored by some historians. No one likes a complicated story. Short and simple is a lot easier to handle. My aim in this course is to attempt, that's all I can do, just try to make connections between holiness and other religious and cultural movements in the long 19th century. We'll be talking about that. Understanding the vast and diverse global cultural and religious networks that assisted in the birth, growth, and expansion of the holiness movement. Time and place, the long 19th century, North American origins and global expansion, national and regional expressions. Historians have found that strict chronological breaks into centuries are less helpful. We have long centuries and short centuries, marked not by the calendar strictly, but by events and movements, political, religious, and literary. So the long 19th century, which I'm using for this class, is from the French Revolution to the start of World War I, from 1789 to 1914. Why is that helpful? Well, when you think about holiness, especially OMS-related churches, when did OMS begin? 1901. Which century is that? The 20th. So if you were doing a strict chronology of 19th century, you would not even talk about OMS and a lot of other developments later on. So I think this helps us to get into what was going on. And actually, my preference would be go up to 1950, but I don't have official approval for that lengthening of days. But I did it also in evangelicalism. I fudged a bit and made it a little bit longer because, you know, you can't just talk about how things start abruptly. I mean, think of our own lives, for example, right? So we can see the transition from John Wesley's death in 1791 to the start of OMS in Tokyo, in Korea 1907, and the birth of the Church of the Nazarene in 1908, Pilot Point, Texas, which I regret still. I saw the sign when I was driving back from ETS meeting at Fort Worth 2 years ago. I saw the exit sign from the interstate, Pilot Point, Texas, and I thought, should I or shouldn't I stop and take pictures? I was tired. I wanted to get home. So I kept going into Oklahoma. So missed that chance. Maybe next time. North American origins and global expansion. With a shorter century, the start of the holiness movement, has been said in the 1830s by some religious historians. That's the way I was taught. The Palmer's Parlor in New York and Charles Finney's evangelism through the Burned Over District, which is western New York and Ohio, and his teaching at Oberlin in Ohio have been viewed as places of origin. The longer 19th century allows us to view both transatlantic and trans-Pacific connections and the importance of Methodist and holiness missions. So this class will be a little bit different than some others because I'm including a lot of missionaries. Because I think the message was shared or spread by missionaries more than just the origins in North America. National and religious regional expressions. Holiness has many cultural expressions through place, so we will be exploring some differences between North American views and other continents and nations. Even in North America, the standard view is that holiness started in the north and was carried into the south. And I challenge that. I think some of the Southern Methodists also understood what holiness was, and it wasn't the carpetbaggers after the Civil War that took holiness and packed it in their bags, their luggage, and went south to evangelize. That's the current academic view, that Southerners were more into other things like honor and not holiness. And you know, the lost cause and all that. Those are American historical discussions. But yeah. And a lot of people say, well, because they were slave owners, they couldn't have been holy people. And of course, that's always Scott's contention. You can't even be a Christian, really, if you're a slave owner. But I've been listening and reading some more, and not everyone was a slave owner in the South. The cost of owning a slave in the 1840s, 50s, and 60s is incredible. It's like owning 3 Mercedes-Benz, the equivalent. So a lot of people think, well, you just go out and buy somebody, for $10. No. Very expensive investment to buy a person's soul and body. So slavery was actually the elite, and a lot of people did not have slaves. They did the work themselves. And those people were not involved in the system. They were aware of the system. They could point out, there's where the plantation owner lives, and he's got a group of 20 or 30 slaves, but they were out in the fields picking themselves, and they also had a different heart. And some of them were holiness people, I believe. So the long 19th century in the U.S., let's talk about that. Methodism's westward move from the East Coast to the West Coast. Frederick Turner's frontier thesis. As religion moved west, it became more diverse. It changed along the way. And some people have also written books that talk about the expansion, the westward move of Methodists and Baptists. They were most successful on the frontier, and their churches multiplied. But the Presbyterians didn't do too well. The Congregationalists and the Episcopalians didn't do too well moving west. But the Methodists and the Baptists grew and grew and grew as they moved west because they adapted. They adapted to the life on in the frontier. And if you think about in the United States, among Protestants, what's the number 1 church? Southern Baptist Convention. What's the number 2? United Methodist Church. And then you get into number 3 would be, actually it would be probably Church of God in Christ, or the Lutherans would be probably 3rd. And then you jump down a couple to get to the Christian Church and the Presbyterians and the Congregationalists and some of the other groups that are, the Methodists expanded and they grew and grew. Revivalism also is an important part. It's not always included in the discussion. In fact, some people see Charles Finney as a less than holiness figure. And they are saying that he kind of messed it up. He got it off track. especially his new measures. We'll be talking about that. You do have a short reading when you get your course back from Charles Grandison Finney, who was originally a Presbyterian, later a Congregationalist. He was president of Oberlin. He was professor of systematic theology. But more than that, he was an evangelist who just traveled all over at that time, called the Burned Over District. Charles Finney. So some people say he was not holiness, and especially people who love Jonathan Edwards hate Charles Finney. They're seen as opposites. Wars. War always has an effect on churches. And I'll be honest with you, we have not had a war in the United States. Korea was 1950. This last Sunday, as you all know, Yu-Gi-Oh! Was the beginning of the Korean War in 1950. How many years ago was 1950? 73 years ago. And the war ended July 27th, 1953. So that was a good year, wasn't it, Ron? Wonderful year for his birth. But for Korea, the whole country was destroyed and they had to rebuild. And you can see the devastation upon the nation, and the churches suffered also. Churches suffer also. So when we think about, for example, let's go just most currently, the war in the Ukraine. The church in the Ukraine is affected by this.
Yes.
First of all, they're leaving their homeland. They're going as refugees to other countries to stay alive. But yeah, this is something that will be that will be a major mark on the church. Think about the wars before that. Think about the genocide in Rwanda and all the genocide that's going on even in Congo. All those wars hurt the church. They are scars on the church as well as society. You cannot say the church is not affected. The church is affected. And you can go all the way back through every war. Churches have been affected. America, we had lots of wars. But the last time we had a war that was fought on American soil was the Civil War of 1861 to 65. Abolition, emancipation, very important events that were going on. A movement that many Methodists, many holiness people were part of, bringing about freedom for people enslaved. And also world missions and voluntary associations. I really want to highlight world missions. I think that's something I want to really carry forward in my research, is the importance of holiness to missions and vice versa. And then also volunteer associations. A lot of people don't know about this, don't talk about it, but it's very much a part of the holiness movement, or even / evangelicalism. First of all, the temperance movement. What's the temperance movement? Can someone tell me, please? Temperance.
Alcohol.
No alcohol. No alcohol. Drinking no alcohol. And this is something that actually in the 19th century in America, conservatives and liberals were united on this issue. When I look at the theology of some Methodists like Frances Willey and Evanston, Illinois, she was very progressive in her theology, but she was very committed to this issue, and many others. And of course in Kansas we had Carrie Nation. Carrie Nation was Disciples of Christ, Christian church. She would go into bars. You know the stories, right? If you're from Kansas, you know all about Carrie Nation. She would go into the clubs, the bars where men were drinking, with an axe. And she started swinging the axe and breaking all the bottles of alcohol. And people were terrified of this crazy lady. And she said, "Get out, get out, you're going to hell, get out." And so as a result, temperance is so ingrained in Methodism that even today, I'm not United Methodist pastor, our brother here is a full elder. He can testify even more. I know members in my congregation drink alcohol. Some of them even have offered me a beer. I don't drink at all. I quit. I used to drink, but I quit. But the communion we serve in the United Methodist Church is always grape juice. Always grape juice. And you can look at American churches. There are many. In Korea, communion, songchan, grape juice, 아니요. 포도주, right? It's wine. And I remember when I came to Korea and was working in Presbyterian churches, and they passed the communion, and I took a drink, and because it was sul, it was alcohol. And I just about, it tasted like brandy. It was 30%. It was strong. So anyway, grape juice, yeah. But they have wine. And many times it's homemade wine, right? By churchmen, Konsanim, somebody will make homemade wine for Songchan, Holy Communion. So temperance movement is very strong. And it not only affected alcohol, but there was also a Sabbatarian movement that affected the sale not only of alcohol but other items on Sunday, the Lord's Day. There were blue laws. Anybody know what a blue law was? Can you tell us, Brother Alden, what is a blue law?
Well, there's items not to be sold on Sunday, or in some states can't be sold till afternoon on Sunday.
Okay, all right. So items, for example, alcohol. I remember in Texas, tools. The tools section where you buy hammers and nails and stuff in the store was blocked off. There was a little ribbon. You're not supposed to cross it. Certain items. They don't want you working. They don't want you hammering a nail on Sunday. Okay. And also it used to be Sabbatarian laws. Many Christians, and this is true in Korea and your nations as well. Sunday was the Lord's Day. You go to church, you go home, end of story. The end of the day. You don't go to the movies. You don't go to sporting events. It's all about Jesus and focusing that day on Him. So things have changed. But the Sunday school movement, anyone know about the Sunday school movement? That was started also in the 19th century. Anyone know the background of the Sunday school movement? I'm sure this Dr. Vermillion.
Robert Riggs.
Yes, Robert. There. Ron, would you please give us and tell people what the real purpose was of the Sunday school and D.L. Moody and all that. Please stand up and tell us. We've got a CE prof in the house.
Robert Riggs was the founder of what we know as the modern Sunday school movement, and was designed to teach children who were involved in child labor in the Industrial Revolution in England. And he brought them out and taught them to read by using the Bible. And so they learned, and of course as the laws changed and the children were moved out of industry, they were able then to read and go on for further education and so on. That was the only education any of these children had for a long time. The interesting thing is, as it moved west, as it moved into the U.S., most of the churches, Methodism was one of them, refused to incorporate it incorporate it into their church services, and it wasn't until several decades later that it began to become a thing. And so you have Sunday school in church. That was kind of the carryover, but for years the main church, the mainline churches in the U.S. resisted.
Oh, interesting.
And holiness churches often brought it in as a way of helping their people learn the Bible.
Amen. Thank you. How many of you still have Sunday schools in your churches? Let's see hands. My hand's down because we do not. We have a Wednesday night children's program. We reach out to kids in the neighborhood, feed them, and then we teach them about Jesus. But yeah, you have do it up, Joe?
Yeah.
Sunday school. Interesting.
I minister it.
Okay.
We give more importance to Sunday school. Why? Because we learn from the Western countries that if you are not training the second and the third generation, the churches will go empty. How we find in UK and other countries, the churches have been turned into temples and clubs.
Yes.
So we don't want that to happen in our country, so we insist, and even yesterday I was impressed by the way they were encouraging the second and third line
Okay.
leaders and generations.
So talking about the church you visited.
Yes.
Yes.
Even in India, we give more importance to that.
Okay.
It's one of the way we can have a ministry, the opening door, Sunday school is the
Sunday
opening door for ministry. Through children, we reach
Parents.
parents, people of other faiths, not exactly to the Christians, but even the Hindu people, Muslim people. That is easy way.
In ECI, we give more importance, and we emphasize to have a separate department from the top, from the national level till the last level.
Okay.
We have 4 to 5 levels. We make sure all the 5 levels are different departments and committees.
You have Christian education all the way through
Another thing is
the life
Karnataka.
cycle.
Today's mega churches are the result of Sunday school ministry in Karnataka.
Before that, there was no Hindu fanatics groups. They are not bothered about that Sunday school. Nowadays, they are bothered about Sunday school. And they also running as Sunday school
Oh,
about
yes.
their religion.
Yes, that's true. A lot of groups that are persecuting the church end up
I have seen in my own eyes in Delhi where the small children are called up from the villages and they are teaching the Hindu religion to them, how we do it in our Sunday schools. And in India, most of the things, especially the gathering of the congregation, the prayers, are all learnt from the Christians, and now the Hindus are very active in that. we are gathering in a week 2 or 3 times, but they are gathering every day.
They have taken these policies like system, they should implement, the Hindus are implementing.
Francis Asbury, of course, you know, his namesake university, namesake seminary, we have a graduate here of Asbury Theological Seminary. I feel, again, this is a work in progress. Again, I apologize for not having it all completely finished. It's a work in progress. But I wanted to include him because I think he is a key figure between Wesley and what other people would call the holiness movement in America, Francis Asbury. And his hands were upon everyone's head. In fact, I found this out. Some people are not impressed, but I found out that when I was ordained as a Pentecostal holiness pastor, I actually did the research and found out that my ordination through the bishop, the Pentecostal bishop that prayed for me, goes back to the holiness movement, goes back to Methodism, and this man is in my lineage.
Oh.
Now, I'm not talking about apostolic succession, no. I'm just talking about if you look, you can do that online. You can look up the bishops, whoever ordained you, who ordained him, and it goes back to Francis Asbury and Thomas Cook and the Church of England, even a Pentecostal. So Francis Asbury was pretty much ordaining everyone. He was just, I mean, he's the guy who put them on horses and said, go, go. And sometimes they went so far they could never get back to see their family but maybe once a year. And I can't remember, I heard this once, but I didn't take notes. I was a little sleepy. But the average lifespan of a circuit rider, you mentioned circuit riders, I think was in their 30s. I mean, the life was so tough going out there. And they would go miles and miles and miles. And not only were they riding, but if you remember, Wesley gave them a reading list of materials, the course of study, and so they would be riding their horse and they would have a Bible or a book they were reading as they were riding the horse.
It's true.
And so but it was a very tough life. Many times sleeping out under the trees and not good food. Whatever someone would give you, sometimes you'd go to a small church and people would provide a meal. Sometimes they didn't have any food to provide, so you would have to wait till the next stop. But Francis Asbury, he's one of my heroes, and I would like to include him more. And so that's one of my projects, is to see him as a key between Wesley and Palmer's and Finney in the 1830s. There's the Methodist circuit rider. This man is blessed, he has an umbrella, but not everybody had an umbrella as they were traveling around. Camp meeting, that's another part of the 19th century that I think should be included in our study of the holiness movement. Camp meeting. Can someone tell me what's going on here? Look at the picture. This is an artist's rendition. Maybe he was present there and was sketching, and then when he got back to his studio, he completed the project. But what can you see in this picture? Where's the preacher?
He's on top, he's preaching there.
There's the preacher.
Yeah.
What's he doing there?
Standing, I think.
This is very expressive or emotional preaching and worship. People are being affected by the Holy Spirit emotionally. And even during Wesley's ministry, I don't know if Dr. Pock mentioned this, people would fall out. Some people think this is a Pentecostal weird thing. And yes, it does happen in Pentecostal churches. It's happened when I've preached. You lay your hands on people, and sometimes they fall over. They fall down, slain in the Spirit. But it happened to Wesley in his service. He wasn't laying hands, just people would just scream and then fall down on the ground. It happened to Jonathan Edwards during the Great Awakening. It happened to George Whitefield. And I remember reading more about Jonathan Edwards' reaction, and someone said, you need to tell them to quit acting like that. You're a decent Presbyterian, Congregationalist pastor. People should not be acting like that. You know what he said? Who am I to judge what the Spirit, how the Spirit is moving on a person? Who am I to judge? And of course, there were times when it was a demonic influence. And some people in those days were screaming because they could see the fires of hell in front of them. And they were screaming to God for mercy. So yeah, when you're preaching fire and brimstone, people are probably hearing that and reacting. And if you say, well, you're going to hell unless you repent. Oh, really? Where's that? You talking about soul? No, I'm talking about hell. So now people don't have an emotional response. But 200 years ago, when you told people, if you don't repent, you're going to hell, they were terrified. They did not want to go to hell. It's not like a few funerals I've preached recently where the family picks out the hymns, and one of them, in heaven there is no beer, that's why I drink it here. That's a real country western song. I'm sure you've never heard it. Okay. But anyway, camp meeting, you can see social event. Sometimes people went there to hear the gospel. Sometimes they went there to meet their next mate, husband or wife. It was a dating opportunity, like the old skating rink when I was a kid. Kids would go there to get a boyfriend or girlfriend. They would go to the camp meeting. But you can see she's expressing an emotional response. They're raising their hands, and some of them, we don't see anyone. Some of the pictures you'll see someone on the ground falling over.
The lady right in the center, right in front of the preacher's falling backwards, it appears.
She is, okay. And people brought their kids. Yeah, right there, she's falling over. So someone's catching her. So people are responding emotionally. And of course, they're all dressed up well. Their Sunday go-to-meeting clothes. Their Sunday
happens,
best. Yes, sir.
It happens regularly or?
The camp meetings were held. Now, of course, going into the late 19th century, early 20th century, we still have camp meetings, but they're a little bit different. But these outdoor camp meetings began in the 1790s in Kentucky. The most famous was 1801 in a place called Cane Ridge in Bourbon County, Kentucky, which is northeast, a little bit northeast of Lexington, in a place called Paris, Kentucky. And they still have the actual meeting place. And they said that 12,000 people came to the Cane Ridge meetings, and it was preached mainly Presbyterians and Baptists. 12,000 people showed up from all over. And I think the population in Kentucky at that time was maybe 4,000 or 5,000. So it's, yes, 1801. So it was amazing how people came by carriage. They rode their horse, they walked, because this happened about 3 days. People heard something's going on there. I want to go. Where do they go now for something happening? For some entertainment. They don't go to church, do they? No, sir. They will not go to church for entertainment purposes. It's something called the
I disagree with that.
Arrowhead Stadium.
I might disagree with that.
What's that?
I think some of our modern churches are competing by being more about entertaining their
Okay.
people
Okay.
in the seat than they are ministry.
Right. So, but I think the people who go there, they are entertained, but that's not their primary means of entertainment.
But it's what brings them back.
Yes, yes, sir. I agree with that. I agree with that. But a lot of these people, this was the only thing. There weren't sporting, there was no
Oh, yeah, no
NFL,
competition.
NBA, nothing to do except, not even movies. So the only thing to do was go to the camp meeting. And a good thing, I mean, when non-believers go, for whatever reason, if they can hear the gospel, amen.
That's right.
So we're all about gospel preaching. And people would take turns preaching, and you've heard the expression, stump preaching. That's where it came from. So not only was this guy preaching at this little covering, but there'd be some other places where they had felled a tree, and there'd be a stump, and there'd be a guy maybe over here 100 feet away, or 300 feet away preaching, and all over people gathered around. Yes, entertainment is becoming a very big part of the mega church in America, the entertainment value. And that, yeah, I'll get to that when I talk about evangelicalism, because it's probably happening there more than anywhere else. I've been to some of the big churches, not been to Houston, Texas to see Joel Osteen, but I went to Willow Creek, because I was at Trinity, and Willow Creek was just down the road in Chicago. And I'll never forget going to Willow Creek. Bill Hybels was not preaching, one of his associates was. But that entire service, the only thing I could do as a person sitting in the, wasn't pews, it was more theater seating. The only thing I could do was put money in the popcorn buckets as they were passed. I could not sing. They had a group, there was no congregational singing. I could not testify. I could not pray. Everything was done from the platform. The little skit, the message, the guy sitting on the stool, all of that was down there. And especially congregational singing, I felt left out. But they had a professional team of singers, guitars, and all the modern instruments, so they were singing the song. We were just at a concert, just at a concert. So yes, I'm sure these people were able to sing though. And people back then knew the hymns. Westward expansion from 1803, we have the Louisiana Purchase from France, double the size of the USA. All these things fill in the blanks of how the church grew. And we have to realize that cultural, social happenings influence the growth of church. Sometimes the churches that grow are the ones that move their building or build a new building in a growing neighborhood. And somebody says, well, it's the Holy Spirit that's blessing our move. Well, a lot of it's just that you're in a neighborhood that there are new people looking for a new church. And when you were in the other area, there weren't people looking for a new church. Lewis and Clark expedition, where I live, I see signs everywhere. Lewis and Clark stopped here. Lewis and Clark stopped here.
Yes, that's true.
All along the Missouri River, all the way up north. 1831, this is an important part. Native Americans were forced to move west by the U.S. government. This was called the Trail of Tears. Did this affect the church? Yes, it did. Yes, it did. Some missionaries, though, were ministering to these people as they were removed. This was a government decree. Gold was discovered on Native American lands, especially in Georgia. In the 1830s, they were told to move west to Oklahoma. We've got a new homeland for you. And of course, many died along the way. They were walking. Some of them had boats and they would go on the river, but mostly they were walking. And to think about crossing the Mississippi River in summer, it's not going to happen. You have to wait until winter when it's frozen and just make your way across the frozen river. But this was Trail of Tears. Thousands of people died. Missionaries were ministering to people. Churches were giving food and helping people. But also it was a blight upon the majority churches that just looked the other way. This is not our business, and they weren't involved, so it was a very, very difficult time. Many people followed the Oregon and Santa Fe trails to new territory in the West, especially when the government offered people a parcel of farmland if they would take care of it. That was called the Homestead Act. America offered, if you go west, we'll give you, was it 40 acres and a mule? And a lot of people took that offer. Poor people can get free land and one mule, so they were moving west. Many countries do not offer any benefit to those who would move to a new area, but some do. Lewis and Clark Expedition, Trail of Tears.
There weren't that many wagons.
Yes, that's true. There's the Civil War, the Emancipation Proclamation, 13th Amendment, outlaw slavery in the USA. General Lee, the Confederate Army surrendered to General Grant at Appomattox Courthouse in Virginia. Civil War, Union soldiers, a nation was divided and churches were divided. The division of churches, the Presbyterian Church divided in 1837. It was united when? 1968. The Methodist Church divided in 1844. It was united when? 1939. 1939, between North and South. Methodist Episcopal Church and the Methodist Episcopal Church South united along with the Methodist Protestant Church in 1939. The Baptists divided in 1845. When did they unite? Not yet. Not yet. There's still the American Baptist churches in the north, the old Northern Baptist Convention, and still the Southern Baptist Convention. Episcopalians divided in 1861. I'm not certain of that date. I don't have my radar focused on the Episcopalians, sorry to say. Significant historically, but I have not had time to follow them. And I've only known a few in my life. I guess I don't live in the Episcopalian neighborhood. Immigration. The original settlers, immigrants, were from England, the Netherlands, and France, and the northern parts of America, with the Spanish settling and the Portuguese also, Florida, California. The majority of Americans were Protestant and European. 1845, the first potato famine in Ireland sends the masses to America seeking a better life. So now we see Catholics coming. There had been English Catholics in the United States, but we see Irish Catholics, later Polish Catholics, later Italian Catholics at the end of the 19th century. So in America today, it's much like Germany. It's divided pretty evenly between Protestants and Catholics. And I know some people will not tell me the truth that they have Catholic family members, but actually most Americans do, because the population is mixed and you have Catholic friends. But other countries, when Catholics are either the great majority and there are a few Protestants, or vice versa, like Korea, people don't know much about the other side. But they are coming, and there's a Protestant reaction to Catholics. There is a nativist movement in the 1850s. And even to the point of the election of John Fitzgerald Kennedy to the U.S. presidency in 1960. My grandmother, who at that time was a Southern Baptist, said the church called a special meeting to tell everyone in the church that they should not, even though my grandmother was a loyal Democrat and labor union member, they should not vote for John F. Kennedy because he would be more loyal to the Pope than to the American people as a Catholic. And of
But
course
he was
now,
one of the best president in America.
well, that if you don't know his scandals, you would say that. But if you know the scandals of these people, you would not say that. He was a womanizer, sorry to say.
Oh,
Very much so.
We don't know
John F. Kennedy.
John F.
that. But we
Kennedy.
praise him in our.
And Marilyn Monroe was one of his girlfriends. Anyway, the number of Catholics coming completely changes the population and the religious attitudes. So all of a sudden, we're not the only ones. We have to share. We have to share. And I think the holiness movement was learning to do that. And we don't have time to get into it, as I said, but there is a very Catholic view of holiness. And I'll be honest with you, I served in the U.S. Army as a chaplain's assistant, and I worked with priests as much as I did Protestant chaplains. And I saw some of the devotion. Yeah, some of those priests smoked, some of them drank beer. But when I saw them praying the liturgy of the hours and getting up early in the morning to pray that every day, they never took a day off. And they would say Mass early in the morning at 6. And I thought, here I am as a Protestant only going to church once a week. And some of the older Catholics were there daily Mass and going to shrines and doing special prayer. So they have a spirituality that sometimes shames Protestants. Sorry to say. Sorry to say.
You can see this around the globe.
Yes, true. Immigration after 1890, immigrants to the USA were coming more from Eastern Europe and Southern Europe, meaning that more Orthodox, Catholic, and Jewish people were coming to America. Now we're getting this American history basics so that we know where it started, but we will go global. Believe me, we will be going global. But we need to have the roots. We need to understand what's going on in America. Holiness, I mean, some people might say, well, it's a Holy Spirit movement, and it's just a matter of people praying and the Holy Spirit falls down and it's Pentecost all over again. But there are also social and cultural conditions that temper any religious movement. Okay, looks like it's time for our next break. Are you ready? Take a 10-minute break. Then the next break after that will be lunch, so please take a 10-minute break.
Yep.
Well, I'm very impressed.
Well, I just felt like I needed to give the background, because as you know, I'm an historian, so I want to talk about the big picture.
Yeah, but you're giving context for this,
Yes.
but it's very good. I sat in with Dr. Harrington's class several years.
It's kind of like my evangelicalism classes.
Well,
I'm piggybacking off of it.
Yeah, we'll see. But I'm rethinking, I know that, especially if we get the Philippines,
Yes, yes.
but otherwise, I think, we'll see by the time we get to it. But the way you're setting, because, and maybe that was just the way Leroy was, but he did not do, you sketched a broad context for the US because from here, we move overseas.
Right.
But as far as I remember, he did very little overseas.
I want to get overseas, but I want to show the roots.
Yeah, well, so you're doing a much broader thing.
I've always done that.
Yeah, no, I'm
And
very
some people
pleased.
say, when are we getting to the meat? What's all this salad? I want the meat and the potatoes. Well, that's in the course pack, and you'll see some heavy-duty readings in there.
Susan sends her greetings.
Well, good. So she's in the States now.
Yes.
Okay.
He was a good man. I felt like he was a good professor. He wasn't a Wesley.
There was a guy who was a friend of Hughes.
Yeah, he
He pastored up in Collinsville or something. We were close friends.
That was the connection, yeah.
Okay, he passed away or something, somehow along the way. So we went out to semesters or something.
I had him at least for 2 years. my first semester. First semester, he was president. But when he wasn't, he didn't teach the whole year. It was, I had he and, I think that was Springer's first year. Okay.
So, Cox,
Cox, he taught,
Cox, like, finished his presidency in
yeah, so I had Hughes for, I had Hughes for OT. I had Springer for NT. I was supposed to take Springer, I was supposed to take OT in the spring semester first year, but because of the conflicted with my music reprogram, then was trying to put together. So I didn't take,
so you came after Lewis.
Lewis was my first year.
Oh, was it?
And then, so I had Ernie, Caroline the first year. Yeah, I only had him 1 year. And then, let's see, Cox taught. It does, I can't.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't know. But then this new, by my junior, okay, I went to school I was in school 73, 74, 76, 738, and graduated. I completed my education in December 78. Over 5 minutes. I graduated. I walked up to the school. I didn't get around to New Testament until like 50 years.
You know, it was interesting, looking back, and this was probably something that somewhat tainted my view of Bartlesville later, for a time. It was my last year, I took this twin bunch of pre-regs. In the final year, this is, I had all my theology. I think I had some Greek and stuff.
Dr. Rogers taught Greek.
Yeah, yeah.
And he, I can't remember that, but he didn't teach anything, I wasn't into Greek, because I wasn't really, that's what anyway, go ahead.
He was my advisor.
Oh, I'm sure.
And so I asked him the last semester. You know, why did you recommend
Attending this class, you get credit. Learning.
You may be.
And, you know, I was almost embarrassed.
You do 20,
But he was
21st
embarrassed as
century.
well. And it really was torn. And
So that's one course. The second course is divided into two parts. 4-4. And we look at each other's articles of faith, or doctrinal statements. It's really very light. So in the sense of light in the sense of reading the environment. It's much more talking, we present to you, there's a little
The reason there
book
was a
that's,
process.
Exactly.
before 412, it's a history of Calvin, but I don't even
So,
require you to.
So was there a,
Just
there was
a summary.
a history,
uh,
church history class?
Yeah, it's a very relaxed.
And
And the second one, Darius, the second part of that is Wesley and his power,
Another class.
entrepreneurialism. And Derry teaches that, and it is not a heavy course. Many students felt like it was one of the best. But you as reading, or get more reading, but because then I know you only have X amount of time.
So we have to stay healthy. That's really relevant because that's where they go.
Yeah,
And I'm trying to remember who taught me. That could have been
Yeah.
Could be, yeah, very well.
So we would say this is a Wesleyan holiness course. Yeah, we call it a program, but the program is a course.
Big garam one
The
year.
course has 4 subjects.
भैया
How's that?
इनपे गरम पड़ी नहीं है
Yes. No, you got it.
इधर इधर अभी आ रहा है
Just in case, you know,
2 subjects per year.
maybe that was gonna start back up, is details.
But now that I said that, next year, because my course is divided
But
into
I
2
had
parts.
already kind of learned
Fourfold,
that
West, yeah.
process.
So we could say we have 5 subjects. Not everybody. 2. Yeah. And what happens is you are, usually you're in the morning with me.
You know, it's,
And
yeah,
then
I mean, extemporaneous speech is one thing, but
And I think that's another thing that helps too, and that may switch is that it's a different approach.
Anyway.
No, I understand exactly. So, and maybe we should make that clear.
So anyway,
Because the course,
I remember going back.
this is a
Suman,
subject in the course.
hey Suman,
Yeah.
where is Sumati? Where is Sumati?
Okay, no, it's very good, because the reason we developed that course was that when we did.
Last class there was one Sumati or what's her
Those
name?
of you
Huh?
Sumi are not
Sumi, today Sumi is not there?
Wesleyan veterans. So whether you do a course on
Yeah, I asked
you
her,
want to give your
she
range
said,
of
I
subjects.
want to become professor
So
of
that you
English.
Oh, she want to become, no, she's working as a professor.
Ah, another tapapuri.
Amma, she's a professor.
I said, I'm coming for learning.
That was the exciting thing was that they.
How would you rather have?
She's professor.
Enna college?
Your college, Roman Catholic.
That was a good guy.
Oliver Pod wrote a course.
So, but he, but,
That one time
but
wrote a
anyway,
course on John Wesley.
he had his way.
To submit to Senate
He had his way.
for
We either loved him or not.
Andamma,
There were
Andamma,
If you were in the ceremony,
Andamma, Pinali Camp. Pinali grammar la. Moonu table change aaychu. Pinali nunchi inga bangu vechi. Moonu table change aaychu. Moonu class change.
yeah, that's the way they make sure that there is. Yeah, you understand. So it was hard for me to grasp it because, but I understand the principle. They want to make sure everything is taught. You can use different methods, but they want to make sure the main things are.
Yeah. God. World is in your hand. Brother, now world is in your hand.
Game and all.
Thank you, I'm so glad you came.
Debbie was the same way.
It's taping now?
Yeah, sure, you can edit also.
Okay.
Yes, I forgot to,
Switch off.
I don't know who's 13.
Neither. Both
My only real story I've interacted with stands up.
Climate is little changed.
Yeah, now, rainy is started.
Classroom.
So rainy season.
Oh, rainy season. Today onwards? Oh. So no,
I was
not season now.
We won't get the atmosphere like last week.
which please spill my
One week only
freshman.
rain.
Could open my.
Yeah, that is why we have to visit very soon, we'll have to finish.
Visit.
Marketing and over here, there.
Still you are not finished task.
It's Schwartz.
See, my brother's children out there, my sisters, they are farmers.
Stay off the
They
ground.
last lunch.
Something.
Oh, you are more class ಇಡ್ತಾರಾ? ಮೂರು ಕ್ಲಾಸ್ ಇಡ್ತಾರಾ? ಅವರು ಎಂಟು ಇಡ್ತಾರೆ இல்லையா?
So I'm gonna use God's grass.
ಅವರು 12 ದಿನ ಬಿಟ್ಟಾರೆ. ಅವ್ರು ಊರ್ ಚಟ್ನಿ ಹಚ್ಚಿ ಬೈತಾರೆ. அந்த ரெண்டு தான் கொண்டு வந்து பாருங்க நீங்க கோட்டை அப்படியே வந்து திரும்ப அப்படியே பெயர் வராது நம்மளும் அப்படிதான் பண்ணுவோம் ஒரு ஐடியா இருக்கு ஒன்றும் ஒன்றும் बस पैंट शर्ट इधर लेने का पेन लेने का फिर बाइक में
बनी ने बस इधर आके सब
वो भी तो उधर मिल रहा है जो वो बोल रहा था ना वो
हाँ
ई मार्ट में जेटी
बहुत अच्छा है
इतना कंपनी का नाम क्या क्या पावर क्या पावर 5000 ये तो सस्ता है उससे ज्यादा होगा
Let's continue until lunch and then we'll go on after that. Remember our schedule. Remember our schedule is from 9 to 12. And then lunch for 1 hour and then we'll go from 1 to 4. Now, I remembered from living here many years that there were a couple of people who mentioned they would like to go visit a Buddhist temple. If you remember where the Sosa train station is, we went on the subway both times, we went down to the hill to Sosa. From there, it's about 1 to 2 kilometers walk. So if people would like to go, it's not a short walk, but it's not impossible. We can go visit a temple, and that would be after your supper
Today?
today.
Oh, that's
And
great.
then Wednesday, I will try to make it possible for us to go to the world's largest church, on Wednesday, Suyoyepe. So we can have some, but I think we will probably have to go by bus, but I will get the information.
You can take our vehicle.
I'm thinking we have to go on our own, but anyway, at least the temple it's within walking distance.
do you want me to ask about Wednesday to have the van?
I can ask about it, yeah, but
Let's have a local bus.
but that's something they would probably not be able to park That's the difficulty, because there's no parking space. I remember driving around 3 hours.
They dropped us off.
They would
last
drop,
week.
yeah, have to drop you off and then come back and pick you up, yeah. It's a little more, yeah, you're right, it's complicated bus-wise or even subway, not a direct line. So that's always a challenge, yeah. If you wanna put your 2 cents in, I'll put mine, and we'll have $1, maybe a quarter. Okay, let's get back to our lecture, again, looking at the context. We're ready soon to shift over to a global conversation again with you.
So I have a question. This immigration, first one is, most of them are Protestants.
The initial immigrants were Protestant, except for those coming to the southern part, and many of them were Catholic. And later, other religions come, and other nationalities come. More Catholics, also Orthodox, also Jewish. But after 1965, this is not a subject for our discussion because it's in the 20th century. But in the 20s, there was something called the Chinese Exclusion Act. The U.S. government said they did not want any people coming from Asia.
Oh,
So in about 1920 something, they stopped people coming from Asia. And that was not repealed until 1965. So after 1965, you see a lot more people coming from India, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Korea, Vietnam, Indonesia, Nepal, all the countries in Asia. So in America, the families that have been there longer are usually Japanese or Chinese, but the others came after 1965. And then with their immigration comes what? Their religion. So there was, for example, Sikhs. There were none in America, but now there are more. There's also more Hindus. In fact, in Chicago, you could drive around and see Hindu temples that were constructed. Even Kansas City, over in the park, there are some Hindu temples that have been constructed.
I have a question, sir.
And Buddhist temples as well. Yes, sir.
Whether America has opened the door to have all the religions in their land?
With people comes religion. And so even the African people who are coming, yes, there were African Americans, but they were mainly the Protestant denominations, but you got people coming from West Africa, East Africa, bringing the AICs, Africa Independent Churches, that's a little bit different than the standard Protestant. Many of those churches, they call them African initiated, African independent churches because they were started by African people, not by missionaries. And so some of the Church of the Seraphim and stuff coming from West Africa and others, those are all over, especially in the urban areas. You can see these congregations. The same way with churches from people coming from India. They're bringing different kinds of Hinduism.
You rightly said that along with people,
They come religion. Yes. And so some people would say, well, you need to stop the immigration to keep those religions out. But America is a nation of freedom of religion. So there's not that kind of feeling that we need to keep these. But there was when the Catholics came. I should remember to underline that. Yes, in the initial immigration from Ireland and other places when Catholics were coming, people were not happy about that.
One more question. When the Columbus on America, after that only this European shifted from
Well, Columbus never set foot on the U.S. soil, the continental United States. He set foot on what would be called Virgin Islands. And of course, yeah, he was down in what's now Dominican Republic and Haiti, that part of the world, the Caribbean, but he never really set foot. But other Spanish explorers came, yes, to Florida and California especially.
later they shifted from Europe to America.
Yes, they brought their religion. Along with the soldiers came the priests or the chaplains. And so they were there, they were part of the team. They loaded on board the ship and they came over. And some of them were able to evangelize, but some of them were mainly busy with their own people. So
And this Jesuits.
Jesuits,
They had a lot
yes.
of land in US.
Yes. There are a lot of Jesuit universities, yes. They're well known for their quality education. Marquette, St. Louis University, Georgetown, Jesuit universities. Okay, there's the picture of immigration in the 1890s. Now, your holiness movement is really at the peak in the 1890s, and these people are probably coming from Eastern Europe, possibly. And the interesting thing is when they came to Ellis Island as immigrants, they would ask, "What is your name?" And people would pronounce their name, and the immigrant officials could only usually speak English. They could not understand the name, so they would write it down however they wanted. So people's names were changed when they immigrated because the officials could not pronounce the name correctly or spell it correctly. So there are a lot of people. And also there were some people who came to America who understood that their people were not welcomed and not embraced, and many of those people changed their names to sound more like Protestant whites, and those would be Jewish people. Jewish people. Many of them changed their name because they knew the persecution, the discrimination against Jewish people. So Larry King is not his real name. Global movements. Now we're going to the world. We've got the globe here as a symbol of what we really want to do. We want to teach global religious history, global perspective. So let's look at these topics: revolution, national independence, abolition, emancipation, missions, urbanization, industrial revolution, and colonialism. All important movements globally that affected the church. You cannot say the church was exempt from these influences. You cannot say that. All of them. They marked the church. Okay, ready? French Revolution. Voltaire and Rousseau were critical of the Catholic Church as part of the
So
Enlightenment.
can we get this in pen drive or email?
Later on, when I get it, I will send it as a PDF.
You will not do any editing.
I know, you don't have to take, if you want, you can take pictures of the highlights, but I can send a PDF of the entire presentation. The French Revolution in 1789 was a major turn away from the church and the monarchy. Church property was sold and tithes were abolished by law. And later in the 19th century, Bishop mentioned Jesuits. The Jesuit order, the Society of Jesus, was outlawed by the Catholic Church. They were renegades because the Catholic Church felt that they were now a threat to the authority of the Pope. So there is, especially in France and in French colonies, there is an anti-clericalism, anti-church feeling. France, the Declaration of the Rights of Man, remember we mentioned 1789 as the start of our long 19th century. They said this: liberty consists in being able to do anything that does not harm another person. Have you heard that before? Have you heard that before? Very prominent in Western ethics, or I should say secular culture. So I remember people talking about certain sexual deviant behaviors, and they said, well, one thing they said, it's two consenting adults. And as long as it doesn't bother anyone else, I can do what I please in the privacy of my own home. So the whole picture of, we are together, we are all members of one community, one village, has been destroyed. So as long as it doesn't bother the other people, I can do what I want. This does not fit at all with the New Testament. If you think about matching this with a New Testament verse, you're not going to find it in the Bible. It's the opposite.
So is this the result of that French Revolution?
French Revolution is very, very phenomenal in destroying the church authority and power and respect. and a lot of church schools were closed. There used to be Catholic universities in France, they were closed. There are just a few institutes now. Holy Roman Empire was replaced by nation states in the 19th century. The power of the Catholic Church is down. Belgium, Netherlands, Switzerland, Austria, Czech Republic, Germany, parts of eastern France, all now individual nations. Unification of Italy was completed by 1870. Before that, it was states that joined together to become Italy. The same in Germany. The same in Germany. Bismarck was the figure that brought all of these parts of Germany together. That's why actually in Italy and Germany, because their becoming a nation was later, there is still a strong sense of regionalism. If you've ever been to Italy or Germany, you have a sense that you're not a German, but you're a Bavarian. You're not a German, you're a Prussian. You're not Italian, but you're from Rome. You're from Naples. You're from Sicily. And people feel like that's their true allegiance, is a region rather than a nationality. Birth of Marxism. This is all 19th century. Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. Look at their dates. They spanned the 19th century. They wrote in 1848, the same year that there were many revolutions across Europe, the Communist Manifesto. It begins with these words: "A specter is haunting Europe, the specter of communism. All the powers of old Europe have entered into a holy alliance to exorcise this specter. Pope and Tsar, Metternich and Guizot, French radicals and German police spies." There was a threat. Yes, sir.
Can you go little that before like Italian unification? Yeah. Can you,
1870, 1871.
that Italy was complete state?
Italy, that's when they joined together as a nation. So just to let you know, these two nations were later. 19th century independence movements. After the U.S., the first nation in the Western world to become independent was Haiti, Haiti, from France. They had a revolution. They fought against France and won, and they became a nation.
The 80 which now the
Haiti, yeah,
Yeah,
Port-au-Prince.
it comes in African continent.
No, it's in America.
It's
South
America.
America.
Yeah, Haiti. Actually, African independence is later in the 19th century, so that's why I'm focusing on Latin American independence movements. Even Indian independence is 1947.
Yeah, very
That's
true.
the 20th century, August 15th. Argentina, 1810, 18. So you can see these are all 20th century. And interestingly enough, sometimes if you look at the dates, there's either a span or there are several dates, because sometimes they would declare their independence and Spain would come in hard and say, "No, you're not. You're not. Yes, we are. No, you're not. Yes, we are." And it would last a couple of years until finally Spain got tired. All of these. Greece was not freed from the Ottoman Empire until 1821. What's the Ottoman Empire? What's their religion? Islam.
Yes, sir, Islam.
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 And so if you think about Greece, I remember meeting some Greek Orthodox, and they were not fans of Islam at all. They were not willing or thinking about having a conversation or a dialogue, interreligious dialogue with Muslims. Because of this, they were persecuted as Christians or taxed, depending on the region, either taxed or persecuted by Muslims. And so they finally got their independence. Brazil from Portugal, 1822. Romania from the Ottoman Empire, same. They had a Muslim influence, 1878. Philippines from Spain, 1898. And I put it there. A lot of people don't know that Philippines was an American empire. America also was a colonial power, an imperial power.
So both Spain and
Spain, Cuba, Spain owned Philippines, but then the U.S., they fought a war in 1898. They won, so they got Cuba, Guam, Puerto Rico, and the Philippines as territories. And the U.S. did not finally grant independence until 1946. So American troops were watching and controlling. Yes, sir.
Sir, we are going through this 19th century
Yes.
national independence.
Yes.
Can you
for information, give us that still how many countries are in the colonial powers?
Still colonial powers,
Like
not
Hong
too
Kong,
many, but they're usually small nation small island states.
like Hong Kong comes under China.
Hong Kong is
Still
still
it's-
part of China, but,
it's not
but some
included.
people would say their independence was from Britain when they left being a British colony to becoming part of the People's Republic of China. So it depends on the view. Some people would say they're finally coming home. But yeah, there are some small states. The French still have some colonies, and America, you could say Puerto Rico, Virgin Islands, still U.S.
So Fiji is
trust
in the-
territories in the Pacific.
Any African continent still in American or British colonial system?
No, I think the Spanish Sahara, is that still controlled by Spain? Spanish Sahara, clear up there by Morocco and Tunisia. Maybe, I don't know.
Maybe France.
Yeah, France still has some small,
Yes.
and so maybe Portugal, the island, Canary Islands is Spain still, and then the Portuguese have the islands off the coast of Africa. What's it called? Azores or something. There's some small islands. Yeah, small islands. I think that might still be controlled by
Maybe-
Spain and Portugal.
Maybe this Hong Kong is lost.
Ah,
Most of the country they.
Right. Verde Islands, Cape Verde.
Yes.
That's
What
still
is the island?
Portuguese. Cape Verde.
Controlled by?
Yeah, I think still. Yeah, still they have control.
Rest of the African countries are more independent.
We'll look at the map of colonialism, we'll get to that. So let's get through this before lunch. Global abolition, this will surprise you. This will surprise you. What was the first nation to outlaw slavery? Sweden in 1335. Japan also did in 1588. Looks good, but what happens? Japan reinstated slavery during the Second World War. So many Koreans were slaves to the Japanese Empire. There were some young girls that were taken, they called comfort women, comfort women. Comfort women. Yes. And they were made slaves to serve the Japanese military as prostitutes, and they were taken from their villages. And that's still a very, very hot issue between Korea and Japan. And also many Koreans were taken to work in factories in Japan and also serve in the military against their will. So that was happening. So until the end of the Second World War, there were people who were pretty much slaves to the military especially. And Prussia, not 1807, this is all ahead of the United States. Argentina, Greece, Chile, all ahead of the United States. Mexico, Britain, 1833. France, Russia, United States, 1865. Emancipation Proclamation, again, was made in 1863 by President Abraham Lincoln, but it could not be put into effect until after the Civil War. And that's when it became, in practice, abolition. Brazil, 1888. Korea, 1894. That's because of the Kachin Revolution, which was influenced. 1905 in Thailand. China, 1910. 1923, Afghanistan. 1924, Iraq. 1928, Iran. Do you see a pattern here? What's the major religion of these nations? Islam. Yemen, Islam. United Arab Emirates. Oman, Mauritania, Niger. Okay. Nepal, 2008. Is that correct, brothers?
That's from Nepal.
Majimak. Is that correct, brothers? Am I telling the truth?
Nepal, 2008.
2007 we said that democracy day.
Okay, so there were slaves. Now again, not all nations had slaves from other countries. In Korea, slaves were Koreans.
You are with
Korean people served as
2008
slaves.
only Nepal
So poor
developed.
people usually.
British.
were taken and they had to serve as slaves.
Brother,
They could not.
no,
yeah,
Actually, you have slavery in Nepal?
2008, Nepal became independent.
Probably the
So
caste
previously it was-
system might have been,
Ruled by kings.
some people did not have freedom.
Yeah, they are
Some
ruled
did
by
not have
kings.
freedom, the caste system.
I think 2018.
Okay.
Yeah. 2008.
2008, that kings.
But the Nepal is never, they were under any.
No. Bishop, it is controlled by one family.
No, whatever it may be, but they are not under any foreigners, no? Like.
The British Raj, I think, reached
No,
into
it's-
Nepal.
No, actually, the Darjeeling parts, this all belongs to Nepal.
Oh, it's
Darjeeling
independent.
and Sikkim and.
No, that's
most of
all
it.
now
It is colonized and
Okay.
I think
Right, Bhutan, Buddhism.
So there is always in a border tension, like states like like we call West Bengal, and where districts like Darjeeling, as he said, Sikkim, and Arunachal Pradesh, still China says that it's our part, it's an internal part of China, and they are building a strong defense base there.
Right.
And coming to Nepal, they say that Sikkim and Darjeeling is belong because our people are residing there.
Yeah.
So there is always, on other side, if you come to Kashmir, like Balochistan, where Pakistan says that India says it's our people,
Right.
and Pakistan says it's our people. So surrounded, India is surrounded by full of tensions. Nange?
Right.
In the down, Sri Lanka also have problem with India. The
And-
island has been given during Indira Gandhi time to the Sri Lanka.
And,
Now
and
we want to-
actually, the controversy about slavery is there were some people that were bond servants, and especially people say, well, the slavery today is not the same as New Testament times. And some people were indentured servants, even coming from Europe. So the levels of what is slavery, where does slavery stop, and where does it start, is under discussion. So yeah, some people would say, well, they're not really, they're paying off their debts.
You
And
maybe,
so,
maybe
yes.
what you are telling is getting is true. Maybe in terms of land owning,
Right,
there
yeah.
are people who have owned land and
Right.
working for our
The serf system and all
Yeah,
that.
they
so
would never
were they
get that.
slaves? Some people would say yes, some people no.
Yeah, later on, maybe 2008, government might have pass out.
Yeah,
maybe
somehow
it's-
emancipated,
so that
freedom.
they can get that
Yeah.
land if they work many years or
Right.
something like that. In that sense, population might.
So the slavery system
Yes.
started after I mean, when the European went to America at that time or before that?
yeah, that's abolished. It's not
Of course, it was going on before, but also there were two slave trades. I learned from my brother, who was my student from Tanzania. And he told me, he said, Americans always talk about the slave trade from West Africa going to America and Europe. But there was a slave trade on the East Coast, East Africa, the Muslim, Arab people were coming and taking slaves back to Saudi Arabia, and the rich Muslims were taking black slaves from East Africa. And he said, most people don't know about that, don't talk about that. So slavery has been around for a long time, no doubt about that. And is it completely abolished? Well, some people would say there's something now called human trafficking. And
Yeah.
that's still going on, and that is slavery.
Yeah.
You know, you take someone and they do not have the ability to make their own choices, whom they marry, where they live. So you take someone's freedom from them, that's slavery.
Well, I've seen accounts that there is now slavery going on in China by almost any definition, by forced labor, by the
Yes.
government. So
Yes.
it's always a matter of definition as well.
Right.
Even some level, even being paid, if you're paying such a low wage,
Right.
is it slavery? So, yeah.
Especially Nepalese people go for Yemen and Muslim
Yes.
countries, no? They will just, from India, they go different places.
Right.
And when they reach there only, they come to know that they were sold by some agents.
Right.
So lots of issues.
Say, now the term is used, it's not slavery, they call that term as human trafficking.
Human trafficking.
Yes.
Because innocently they will be sold to the Western countries, and after reaching the country they will come to know that they have been sold.
That's right. They don't know a lot of times. Let's look here at the 19th century. I think this is very important for people studying history of Christianity. Dr. Latterette, Kenneth Scott Latterette, professor at Yale University, he called the 19th century the Great Century because of the expansion of the church through missions. He also gave it a longer date than 1800 to 1900. So he went into 1914. The modern missionary movement, Protestant, began with the journey of William Carey. And then we talk about the East India Company and the British Raj. This, of course, look at the date, 1852. It expanded to Sri Lanka, Ceylon, and Burma by 1852, Myanmar. And the capital of British India was Calcutta. And we can see also the major revolt, 1857, the British Raj, from 1858 until 1947, Indian independence. Okay? This is all going on in the midst of church expansion, missionaries. So if anyone knows even about, two of our brothers mentioned that their mentor was William Carey. If you read his biography and what he went through, the British were not happy that he was there evangelizing.
He was
Hindus
settled
and
in
Muslims.
Serampur,
Yes.
not in British.
They
colony.
told him, get away, you're
Yes.
bad for business. You're
He
not
was
good
in
for business.
Danish. He was in a Danish school.
Yes.
Serampur.
Danish settlement.
So he was being sent away.
Yeah.
They tried to isolate him. Here's British India. That's an old map.
Yeah, Nepal is not there, brother.
Yes, it.
Happy.
There's a Nepal right there.
Oh, in British India?
Yes.
Oh.
Sir, in this
Political
head is not
divisions
there.
of the Indian Empire.
Indian
You see the another part now. Actually, that
That's only half.
was or
Okay.
they organized.
All right.
Kathmandu is not there. Huh?
Okay, we're going to have just friendly discussion, please, no fights.
I was gonna say, just for
No.
information
only
purposes with those from Nepal, because I know you said you were never conquered by the British.
Yeah.
The British would sometimes include areas in their maps that they kind of counted, but they had no real presence in.
Right.
So they probably said, all right, this is ours.
And there's a
Even though
difference,
yeah.
there's a difference between influence and control, right?
Yeah.
You can have the influence of the British, meaning you speak English, and you have maybe use British currency, British items, but they don't control the government completely. So yeah, there were levels of colonialism.
And the Raja, the king, when he is supporting these people, British people, then he will leave it. Okay, what? If someone is against them, then they will be fight and they'll capture. Maybe Nepal, the Raja will good to support with the British Raj.
There he is, William Carey, 1761, 1834. I remember watching the movie they made, a Christian movie about his life. He goes to India, and it's very hot, and he has one of those powdered wigs that all those people would wear.
Yeah.
And after about a week or two, he said, I'm taking this silly thing off. It's too hot. And so he takes that off and as kind of a standard. There he is. And now I read about his phenomenal cultural influence, not just religious influence, but the way he also translated, you know this quote, right? The beginning of his document, an inquiry into the obligation of Christians to use means for the conversion of the heathen, 1792. This is right before he set sail to India. This is when he was making his argument to the British Baptists that this is something we need to do. And they said, well, if the Indians want to get saved, they have to do it on their own. God will save them. It's not your job, William Carey. Sit down. And so he had to write, it was about an 80-page document making an argument why Christians, and he used the scripture, of course, why Christians should do missions.
Later, this English government,
Mm.
they accepted William Carey. So he only translated lot of laws.
Yes. And he translated the Bible in several languages. This one is in Bengali, the New Testament, by William Carey. How many can read the Bengali? No one. That's a different letter alphabet. But it looks at the date is 1801. When I think about William Carey, and there are a couple of other people that did Bible translation, some of them, they were just in the country 6-7 years, and all of a sudden, here's the New Testament, I just finished it. And here, I was in Korea 18 years still, I'm struggling with Korean. It's not easy. So, and the missionaries that came from America to here, they were doing the translation within 10 years, Underwood and others. Amazing. So some people, I guess, are fast, and some people are slow.
He translated 40.
40.
Yeah,
40
languages.
languages.
Oh my.
My Kannada Bible is first translated by William Carey,
Oh my.
and then it was completed by John Hands.
Wow.
Almost Indian languages,
Almost
translated by
amazing.
William Carey.
Yes,
Amazing.
How is the
even
translation?
Nepali
Yes,
Bible.
Missionary is also.
It has got revised.
Wow.
It has got
Amazing.
revised.
Have you ever seen the original?
No,
one?
no.
I mean, as far as like what he did first,
No.
pictures.
But
Yes, old and
Against he want to do ministry in India.
Old script.
Right.
Even though his wife was sick,
New alphabets.
Yes.
so
now
he,
we wrote this
She was
alphabet.
sick
Yeah.
mentally,
That's
and
it.
she also was
Old
illiterate.
language.
She could not read and write.
yeah,
There comes a
And
difference.
he taught himself. He taught himself all those
he
languages.
changed her and he's writing, translating most of them.
Adoniram Judson was also a very much pioneer missionary. With the Congregationalists, they founded the American Board of Commissioners for Foreign Missions. He was the first missionary from North America who settled he went to India originally. He also originally was Congregationalist, but he became a Baptist. And he started in India, but then he moved over to Myanmar, Burma. And he had a lot of turmoil, a lot of suffering. He was in prison many times. In prison. Also, he lost several of his wives. And that's Judson. And there's, of course, a Baptist college, Judson College in Illinois, named after him. And he graduated from Andover Seminary, Massachusetts, Myanmar. China had a ban against Christianity that was lifted in 1724. The first missionaries came in 1807. Robert Morrison did the translation of the Bible. But they had some national calamities that made mission very difficult. One of them, of course, was the Opium Wars that was fought with Britain, and that was over opium, mayak in Korean. And so the British wanted to make sure the Chinese were addicted, and they wanted to make sure they could freely make money off of the opium, and the Chinese were resisting. And so there were a couple of wars. And then the Taiping Rebellion, I never learned about this until I studied Chinese history. And it was started by a guy who was converted by a missionary, and he was reading the New Testament for himself and decided that he was Jesus' little brother. Jesus is the big brother, I'm the little brother. And so he had this almost messianic complex, and he went around and he got the peasants all stirred up fighting against the British. And against the Chinese government in Beijing. So against the Chinese at that time, it was the Qing, C-H-I-N-G Empire, Qing Emperor. And the British were called in to put it down. And in the end, I think 50 million people died. And this is something a lot of people don't even know about Chinese history. There's Robert Morrison, the first one to translate the Bible. Treaty of Nanking opened trade to China and gave Hong Kong to the British Empire. J. Hudson Taylor, you know about him. He's right in the middle of the 19th century. His view of mission was that you should dress like the people and live like the people. For the most part, Western missionaries were living a lifestyle very luxurious, rich. I can remember when I went to Hong Kong. When I went to Hong Kong, I went on a tour and they said those nice homes up there in the hills belonged to the missionaries and to the British. Because high up, the weather was cooler. And so the British wanted the cooler location. Down by the water, it was very hot and humid. And there was a bigger chance of catching malaria and other diseases. So the British had the nice places up on the hill. But he went into the inland, China inland missionary. So all the other missionaries were on the coast where all the conveniences were, and also protection from the military. The British and French military were in the port cities. But he said, let's go to the villages. Let's go to the inland of China. And he raised up an army of missionaries. There's the Taiping Rebellion. In Korean, Taepyeong Chongguk. Taepyeong Chongguk. So in Chinese it means the heavenly kingdom. The heavenly kingdom. 20 million died, not 50. Again, it's one of those things where the range.
Because of any reasons like?
Just fighting against the Chinese government. But he got the peasants all stirred up. And he said, we need to kill the emperor. We need to kill, these people are not Christians, we need to kill them. 19th century in Japan, the main thing you need to know is about the Meiji Restoration. Rule of the emperors restored. Japan becomes a nation state. 1868, a key date again in our 19th century. Also, Japan became more self-confident and began to fight against the nations like China. You look at little Japan, big China, China lost. Japan also fought the Russo-Japanese War. They fought against Russia. Who won? Japan beat Russia. This was the first person to come to the west coast of Korea, and he was in China a lot. He was actually originally from Prussia, and he was a Lutheran missionary, Gutzlaff. So he and his people went to the west coast of China, Korea by Chungcheongnam-do, over that place, west of Daejeon. Gutzlaff. I won't give you all of that. There's Korea. Where are you right now? There's Seoul. There's Incheon. You're right there.
Near North Korea.
Wonsan, yes.
Wonsan.
Wonsan was a place where missionaries gathered. And it was also a place, now I found this out later, not everybody talks about this, but I thought, why are the missionaries going to the beach areas and the mountain areas? Because it was too hot here. So they wanted to enjoy their summers away from the hot. So they went to Wonsan. It's like a rich people. The same way Taehan, is it the one on Chungcheongnam-do? There was a beach down there.
Yeah.
The missionaries would go down there and stay. It was kind of rich people's style. They even had boats and stuff. They had lots of vacation. Lots of vacation. Not all missionaries were like that though. There were some missionaries that went to the villages and lived just like Koreans and died because of that. Sometimes their body, same in Africa. Some missionaries lived among the people and sometimes they did not live long because their bodies could not handle the disease and the rigors of that. There's Robert Jerome Thomas.
Karen from? No, the previous picture, that person where he is from?
Russia.
He's from Prussia.
Russia.
Prussia, not
Prussia.
Russia, yeah, Germany. Gutzlaff. Robert Jermaine Thomas came from Wales in 1866. He was martyred in Pyongyang. He was on he wanted to get into North Korea. He was actually a missionary in China. He wanted to go, he heard about the Korean people. He wanted so much to preach the gospel. So he had a connection. He got on a U.S. ship, USS Sherman. He sailed into Pyongyang, and there was some firefight between the military on the ship, the U.S. military, and the Korean soldiers, and he was martyred. And he had a Bible in his hand. He had a Bible in his hand, and his head was chopped off, martyred. Anyway, you can read that later. There was persecution against Christians, other Koreans. And that's the ship. And of course later there were reparations, and the U.S. came and said, give us some money, you destroyed our ship and you killed our people, we need to pay. Okay, and that's Pyongyang right there.
This is North Korea capital?
That's the North Korean capital. Used to be called the Jerusalem of the East. That's where they had a great revival in 1907. So it used to be, actually, North Korea had more Christians before the Korean War than South Korea. More Christians. If you look at when I look at the Holiness Church, all the leaders, they're North Korean. Except for Im Young-jik. Only Im Young-jik Moksanim. He was born in Seoul. Everybody else North Korean.
So majority of the Christians.
Right. But after the Korean War, they came south as refugees, and they began to evangelize and start churches. And so now, of course, it's the opposite. All the Christians are in South Korea. So that was
How many
because of-
percentage are in North Korea, Christians?
I don't know. How many Christians in North Korea?
Percentage?
In pro, maybe
Whether
really,
they are-
really small.
whether-
Underground jihad, underground church, jihad.
Recently I saw a video that
Yes.
one family were tortured because they carry Bible.
Yes. But we don't know how many Christians
Now
are
the
in
South
Korea.
Korea and North Korea is like India and Pakistan.
I know.
Fighting like.
Okay, we'll talk about Africa when we come back.
Oh.
Okay? But remember this, I told some of this I used when I was lecturing Korean students. I said, Asia's number one. Where's number two? Europe? No. Where's number two? North America? No. Where's number two? Africa. Land and people. Asia is the largest, number two is Africa. Size and population.
Next to Asia.
Yes. Asia's number one, Africa's number two, not Europe. Europe's clear at the bottom, North America's at the bottom on population.
Because of China and India, Asia stands number one.
Okay.
Because of these two countries.
So we need to exclude China and India, then Africa can be number one.
Yeah. Very true.
Okay.
So India.
Can you do that? Can you move India and China out of Asia so we can have? I'm kidding. Take a break. It's called lunch. We'll see you back at 1 o'clock. Yes. Okay. That's okay.
Thank you, thank you.
No problem. Whenever you have time. Whenever you have time. So you just
I want
turn it off.
Quitting, huh?
Can you